Welcome to the Springs in the Desert podcast. We are the friends you can take with you wherever you are on the path of infertility. If this podcast has been a blessing to you, would you consider giving a gift today to ensure that those on the path of infertility always have a friend in their back pocket? Thanks for your support, and let's dive in. Welcome back. I am Jillian, your host, and I have been waiting to have the conversation that we're going to have today for quite a while. It has been percolating in the hearts of the Springs in the Desert team for years, probably. We've been having little conversations about how to structure a series on this topic well and fruitfully for quite some time. And I have two incredible guests who are going to walk us through the theology of the body. Before we get into that, I would like them to just introduce themselves a little bit. I have Chris O'Neill and Trey Weaver, who are going to be with us on this journey on the theology of the body for several episodes. And so, Chris, would you just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're at, and what you do?
First of all, I've been waiting for years for this conversation too. So hopefully we can do it justice. There's so much to discuss. I'm very excited about it. So I am the director of the Office of Marriage and Family Life in the Archdiocese of New Orleans and founder of Springs in the Desert. And I went to school together at the John Paul II Institute. And she was wise enough to go and start working right out of her master's degree. And I stuck around and did some more studies there. So I'm almost PhD, but I didn't get it all the way finished. But and I've been working here for about, in this role, about 5 going on 6 years now. So
yes, the team loves having the NOLA retreat. We have been down there several times. It's such a beautiful place, and I cannot wait to join them one day.
Have you been down here
No.
yet? Okay, so you get to have this conversation because you haven't.
Yes.
There you
Yes.
go. So
every time I have not been able to make it, I'm just crushed.
Well, we look forward to having you eventually.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amen. And Trey, so good to have you back on the podcast. Can you remind our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Trey Weaver. I work in the Office of Youth and Young Adult Ministry in the Diocese of Baton Rouge. Before that, I was a youth minister, walked with young adults for years. I've been involved with a ministry called ECHO out of the Archdiocese of New Orleans, actually, for about 10 years. And they do Theology of the Body camps and retreats for young adults and for teenagers. So I've been able to help out with that for a long time, and really excited for this conversation as well. The Theology of the Body has been such a gift to me in my marriage and my experience of infertility. So I think it's a great conversation to have.
Yes, I pray and trust that it's going to be the same for our listeners. We've been, as I said, praying about this and discerning kind of the best way to go about talking through this. And so listeners, I just want to give you a little bit of context. There's going to be several episodes, at least 4. We have 4 planned right now. I have a hunch that there are going to be follow-up episodes that will follow for probably the next several years, honestly. I think we're going to continue these kinds of conversations, but the 4 core episodes are going to walk us through the history of theology of the body. Where did that even come from? What is the theology of the body? What does that term even mean? What does this have to do with our experience of suffering, in particular, of course, our experience of infertility and loss? And then where do you start? If you've never read Theology of the Body, or you need a little bit of a kind of a refresher, where should you start? And what are some things that are just good to know before getting into that? So today, this episode is going to be about the history of theology of the body. Where did it come from? And the gentlemen that are on this episode and with us for the series have incredible things to share. And so if I were you, I'd grab a journal. I'd grab a notepad. I'd grab something, because there's just like the Holy Spirit has a lot to say, and he is saying it through these episodes. And I, when we were planning for this episode, listeners, I have at least 4 pages of notes. So if you're like me, get your favorite pen and a journal, and we're going to dive in. I'd just like to start with when I was first introduced to Theology of the Body. It was the big thick textbook that I think a lot of people, or textbook isn't really the right term, but it's the big book. If you're watching on video, Trey's got it and showing you it's quite thick, and it's beautiful. And I read through it. It was for coursework. But that I didn't really have a whole lot of context before that. I was reading a lot in theology. Of course, at the time that was all intertwining, but that was really just my preface. And so I'd like to start, maybe I'll start with you, Chris. The Theology of the Body, right? That is that book that maybe most people are familiar with. Where did that come from? How did that book, how was that written? And then we'll talk about maybe some precursors to that being written, but where did that come from?
Yeah, I actually think it's super helpful for us to just spend a little bit of time on the history of the development of that. And I'm probably the academic of this group, and Trey is definitely the pastoral one. And so we'll be able to kind of, but I want to begin with that this whole thing actually starts with a very serious pastoral problem. It's more of a pastoral problem than a theological one or a philosophical one, that begins with the real problem. That is with the church struggling with the advent of contraception. Now, the things that Pope John Paul II and the Theology of the Body talk about, and the things that was brought forward, reach all the way back in the entire tradition. Like the things that the Pope is saying isn't new, and they don't, there's a reaching back in the entire tradition that's involved. But the advent of it, the reason why it was like, we need to do more work in this area, really in a large way owes its origins to the advent of artificial contraception. A lot of people don't really know this history so much. And I'm going to just kind of skim over the surface, but it is a good place to start if you're interested in studying. During the Second Vatican Council, Pope Paul VI became Pope. And he actually asked that the Council Fathers not address the issue of contraception. It was a current issue that needed to be brought up. And he said he was going to issue a letter about it. Pope John the 23rd, good Pope John, he had a commission that started to study the issue. Pope Paul VI expanded that issue. That commission reported back to the Pope. And the opinion about whether or not contraception is morally admissible in the Catholic tradition was divided. There were actually two reports. Like that commission was deeply divided about whether or not this was morally permissible. And most of the people on the commission actually signed a report that said that it was permissible. And the minority, it was a large minority, but the minority of people argued, no, this is contrary to the tradition. And so this was submitted to the Pope for his discernment. And Paul VI took a long time to write that encyclical. Like, it was a long time. It was like, I think it was a few years before the letter finally came out. And I really think he was really struggling with this, because the issue, and actually I think this is something to understand in the context of Springs in the Desert. Like, these issues surrounding fertility are really hard. Like, they're legitimately really difficult. And the situations that families find themselves in when it comes to like dealing with the reality of fruitfulness in marriage, there's really difficult situations that people are in. And there are really good reasons, like on let's say a practical level, for giving couples a way of managing the difficulties that come with fertility. But then there was also a deeper understanding of the right understanding relationship between man and woman, how that's been understood in the tradition, and a need to defend the rich beauty of the fruitful union of man and wife. And Paul VI was able to see, even back then, that there was something here that had to be safeguarded. It's something that needed to be defended. He knew that contraception was a deep moral evil. And he could kind of, because he understood the nature of, like, he was a pastor, and he really understood like the human practical heart. And so he was able to foresee, not because he was like, had like, a crystal ball that he could look into the future, but he could see like, this is what will happen if contraception becomes widespread. And he predicted like half of what we've gone through, the fall of morals, the way that men treat women, the dissolution of marriage, how states, like all of these things, like this is what'll happen. because he kind of understood on an intuitive level, let's say, the nature, like the thermodynamics of the relationship between man and women. And if you separate sex from procreation, you allow that to happen in people's minds, a lot of things are going to fall apart. And he was spot on. Like the first thing to read is Humani Vitae. He was spot on a very practical level. Like, this is what happens when these two things are separated. And so it's a deep moral evil to separate them. But then he's like, yeah, but there's stuff to work out. Like, it's complicated and hard. And so he actually says in that document that the church needs to deepen our understanding on the anthropological, philosophical, and theological reasons for this teaching. Like, he knew what the answer was, that it was morally inappropriate or morally wrong. But the exact reasons why, theologically, philosophically, in terms of like anthropology means the nature, how we understand what it means to be human, the church's teaching needed to develop. There needed to be more clarity, and there was a call to think about that. Well, lo and behold, who was like one of the foremost academic thinker, philosophical people was Karol Wojtyła, who was Cardinal Archbishop of Krakow. But he was working on these issues already in his like philosophical work. His philosophical personalism, the understanding of a person, understanding the nature of the relationship between people. These are like big philosophical things that people who are in this world hear about, maybe don't really understand. But he was like thinking about this, and he took to heart this call from Paul VI to like deepen our understanding. And so he wrote a book, which is probably the next book that I would recommend, which is a very difficult book called Love and Responsibility. He wrote, there you go. Yes. That's the book right there. Now, let me tell you, any of you who has the courage to tackle this book, it's worthwhile. But the first 100 pages are going to be a slog. You're going to be reading it. It's like, what is he talking about? He spends like a whole chapter on the meaning of the verb to use. And it's like, what are you even talking about? But he's working out the philosophical grounding of the right way to understand a relationship between persons. And so he writes Love and Responsibility. And it becomes central to both his pastoral and his academic work. I went to the John Paul II Institute, and one of the really interesting stories about John Paul II is that it's often said that, the communist occupation of Poland was happening, and the communists in Poland exercised a lot of influence on who the bishops were. Not directly. I mean, the Pope still picked the bishops, but the Pope also knew if they picked the wrong guy, they were going to get knocked off, right? So there was a lot of concern. And when Karol Wojtyła was made the Archbishop of Krakow, there was no objection from the communist authorities because he wasn't seen as someone who was political, like someone who really cared a lot about like communism and liberalism and all that. He was like always talking about, the importance of families. And he was like canoeing with families and like talking to married couples and they were like, okay, that's sick. And, it was like the biggest political mistake of the century, like, because even then didn't understand John Paul II knew, Karol Wojtyła knew the significance of the foundation of the family for this holding together of society. And so anyway, Karol Wojtyła becomes Pope. And he continues to teach on these things. And he really had already was working. He already had notes for another book when he became Pope, where he wanted to explicate in a more pastoral way what he had started with Love and Responsibility. And he realized he couldn't write a book. He was the Pope. He was not going to have any time to write a book. It just wasn't. So what he did instead was he took his notes, and then every Wednesday he would have these papal audiences. So they would be, outside the crowd. He would come out of the papal apartment, and St. Peter's Square, like whoever happens to be in Rome would be hanging around, and he would pray the Angelus, and he'd give a little teaching and give everyone a blessing. And this is something the Pope did. Well, all the for all time. So if you're in Rome, you go to the Wednesday audience, you get a blessing. It's just like this big public event. Well, he used this thing to step by step give these little talks on these issues, and over the course of, I think it was 4 years. Trey, maybe you know better. It was several years. Every Wednesday, he would give like another address, and he basically developed what we now call the Theology of the Body. It's now published in a book form, but each one is the talk for that day, and then the talks for the next week, and the talk for the next week, and the talk for the next week. And in that, he's exploring the biblical basis for the church's teachings about not just the church's teachings on contraception and fertility and infertility and what's morally wrong or morally right and all of that. Like, it's not like a sexual ethic in the first bounce. It was an exploration of the ground that holds up the moral teachings of the church. What does it mean to be human? What does the Bible tell us about how we were created and for what purpose? And what does it mean to live and to be alive and to pass on life to another and so forth? It's like a Bible study, and with a lot of theological reflection built into it. Some parts of it are very dense because there's a lot of like symbolic reasoning in there. You have to get used to his way of speaking about things to try to understand it. But he meant it to be as publicly accessible as he knew how to do, as kind of a brainiac guy, So, and so that's how we end up with the Theology of the Body. And we find out that and this is what we're going to try to explore, I think, is that anthropological and philosophical and theological grounding, what we learn from the Bible, what we learn from the church's tradition about what has been revealed about what it means to be a human being, like all the way down at that level. And even more fundamentally, what does it mean for Jesus to take on flesh and be a human being? Like, how is it that God can be human at the same time? Like that the two natures in Christ reveal something about the capacity of the human heart. And so like all the way down at the deepest possible levels, what the church is proclaiming about the nature of the human person, the nature of Jesus's incarnation, all that stuff, those are that's the deep foundations which the moral teachings rest upon, And so yeah, the Theology of the Bodies is an exploration of those depths, right? And so hopefully we can, it makes it a challenge to talk about the theology of the body because it's rich, but I think it's also a very fruitful thing. So anyway, that's sort of the 10,000 foot history. Anyone who's interested, learn that history, like how that happened, it would help.
Yeah, Chris, thank you. That I think knowing what's happening not only globally, like as socially, what's happening, but also within the church and what the leaders of the church are thinking about and talking about, I think gives context, at least to me, to two things right away. The first is that the church is on earth, our leaders, that we're humans, that it's not separate, that there isn't sort of, yes, there's sort of secular and then the church, the sort of a different perspectives, you might say different conversations, but they're usually talking about the same thing, that the Jesus is present here and now and is talking about the things that we are talking about. And so I think that that's really important. And I think too, to just further to your point, Chris, that the church has said we have to continue studying the truths that we know, that we don't just sort of blindly accept or live out what is a truth. We want to know why it is true, and we want to know the human heart and what that means for us and in our lives and all the implications that it has. And so I think that's really beautiful to recognize and a good starting point. And Trey, I'm wondering, your thoughts. Maybe it is from a pastoral perspective, as Chris had, mentioned, but just you're walking, as you said, with young adults in your own journey, in your marriage, and what's sort of the perspective, the history, all the social things that have been occurring. What is your thought about how the theology of the body came to today?
Well, to me, it's very encouraging that when he was a pastor at a parish attached to a university, Father Carol Wojtyła would take young people on canoeing trips, like Chris said, and they would spend a week or two out canoeing in the wilderness, and they would just talk, and he would listen, and he would hear their hearts. He would hear what they were experiencing, what they were going through. He wouldn't often give much advice, but he would receive them, and he would hear what they were experiencing. And that wisdom gleaned about the condition of the human heart from those young adults, I think, was very important in the rest of his life, and very important for the theology of the body, because, he had a deep understanding of how people think and feel and act and what they experience and how they suffer, not only in other people, but also in his own experiences. He experienced a great deal of suffering in his childhood and in his young adulthood through World War II into his early years as a priest. I also take a great deal of encouragement from the fact that the theology of the body was not just an academic exercise. It was an act of prayer. He would spend an hour a day, every morning before the Blessed Sacrament writing. When he was thinking this was going to be a book, that's how he was writing it. So it was written in prayer. It's a fruit of prayer. It's a fruit of human hearts and human dialogue and discussion. So as I read it over the years, I feel that it sinks in my heart, and it has a weight to it, and it reveals something to me because of those things, and I can feel the presence of those experiences in what he's written.
What you said there, Trey, is extremely important for people who are trying to understand this in the first place, because John Paul II, in the first instance, he's not trying to change someone's mind. Like, he's not trying to argue why someone should act one way or another. I mean, there is a moral component, right, where he is trying to call people to the best of lives, but he loves love. He loves human love, and he watched human love and he was deeply interested in it. And so, the theology of the body has a lot to do with what he learned from paying such close attention to both the tradition and actual people. He believed that what the church taught in its tradition and the reality of the human condition matched. And he was so fascinated by that it's more like someone who's fascinated, like a scientist or something who's fascinated by something and comes to understand it and then says, "Hey, let me show you what I've learned." That's let me tell you something about what I've come to understand. And then, because it's so beautiful, it does have the effect of changing hearts and changing minds. But it's not in the first instance meant to be persuasive, this is why this is right or this is why this is wrong. It's more like, look how beautiful humanity is. Look how beautiful human love is. And that's important to see.
Yeah, I want to, I think, dive a little bit deeper into that, what the theology of the body is and what it isn't. I think, and again, I'll just use my experience. I think, the first time I was shown the big, thick book that Trey showed us was in high school, probably, by my chaplain. I went to Catholic high school, and I believe, I could be remembering incorrectly, but I believe that we were using it to talk about specific situations, right? The implications that you were talking about. And I think we will get into this, I think, in more in further episodes, but I'd like to talk about it a bit here, because I think it's important to it's good to just define your terms and to set the boundaries that what is, if you're just talking about the theology of the body, is it specifically about all the implications, all the things, that the sort of moral situations that you might be able to use that framework to talk about, or is it the framework that we've been discussing? Is it giving us an understanding, a lens, a teaching of the heart, of love, of marriage, of who we are, who God is, and what that means about us. And I think the listeners will probably know, before we even answer this, what we would say that the theology of the body is.
Yeah.
But what is the theology of the body? And then, Chris, I'll follow up with you. What isn't the theology of the body?
In the most simple terms, it's the why behind the ought. We talk as a church a lot about what we ought to do, what we ought not to do, and that's kind of what Humanae Vitae was, and explaining of the fact that contraception is not morally permissible. We ought not to do that, right? Well, Theology of the Body gives us the understanding of why we should or should not do something, because it tells us who we are. And once we understand who we are, then we can know how we ought to live. And if we want to look at the very first address, we can kind of follow the framework that John Paul II gives us. So he takes us to Matthew chapter 19, and the Pharisees are trying to trick Jesus and ask him a question that's going to get him in trouble, right? And they ask him, you say it's not permissible to divorce. Moses said we could. What's the deal? Because if he goes against Moses, that's not okay, right? So Jesus says, in the beginning, it was not so. He points us back to Genesis because he wants to give us an adequate anthropology, a right understanding of who we are as human persons, how we were created to be, so that we can understand how we are called to live.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's very interesting, that pattern. I mean, that it begins with the pastoral question, like a practical pastoral question. What do we do about divorce? What do we do about failed marriages? Like, what do we do about the whole mess that comes up sometimes in marriages? Like, and is divorce the solution? And what do you think about that? And he's like, yeah, you can't answer that question without going to the beginning. Like, you have to go to the depths.
Yeah.
To even, like, you don't, that question is way bigger than you think it is. It's not just a legal question. It's a deeper question. And you've got to go to the beginning. And then the rest of the thing is him trying to go to the beginning, right? Him trying to go back to the beginning.
Absolutely. And an important other thing that I will also add, that I should have added in the first place, the Theology of the Body is not, like Chris said, it's not a new set of teachings. It's not like this revolutionary, completely different set of truths, right? The truths are the truths. They have always been there, and they will always be there. It is a set of lenses with which to view the gospel. That's what John Paul II has given us, like a way to see the truth of the gospel in maybe a slightly different tinge, but it's still the same truth. It's still the same gospel. It's not anything new in that way, or like he's not reinventing the gospel. He's preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ in a human way.
Yeah, before we get into what isn't the theology of the body, I love what you said, Trey, because I think oftentimes the conversations that we're having are posed in such a way that you want to be able to respond to an unbeliever. Someone who doesn't believe. How can I evangelize? How can I share with someone who doesn't believe?
How can I change that person's mind?
Yes, yeah. And sure,
Yeah.
I've had those conversations. The most conversations I have are not with unbelievers. They are with believers who are wrestling with teachings of the church, who have maybe left practicing Catholicism or are trying to find their way through Christianity. And so I love and want to just say again that these aren't new teachings. And I think that that's something that we struggle with in the church. I think I have, especially as I was growing up, if I learned something new, that this seems like, why didn't I know this before? It seems almost sort of oppressive that, or throughout the history of the church, there's, here's a new dogma, here's an encyclical about this thing, and it feels like it's new to people. But just to remind ourselves that the church is constantly investigating its truths, what is already true, and that we're fleshing it out in a way that is accessible to the church today. And that, I think, it's been helpful for me, and I think it's been helpful in other conversations, that this is not just something that, like, my bishop came up with on a Thursday and wrote in, a letter to our diocese. No. He wants to address his people. He's a father who wants to tell his children what they're longing to hear in a way that they can hear it and in a way that's addressing what they're currently experiencing. And so I think, I don't think that can be overstated, that's what this is. So, Chris, what is not then the theology of the body?
Yeah. Well, I want to add, before I just put for us context that you gave, which was beautiful, and I think it's right. It is in a certain sense, it's something new. like the content, like what, like, okay, here's another way to put it. Contraception was wrong before we knew what hormones were.
Right.
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 You know, like the nature of, like the advent of new technologies didn't change human nature. And the scriptures and Jesus and the Bible and Genesis revealed to us the truths about what it means to be human. And those truths haven't changed. But with the advent of new situation, the implications of what has been revealed take on a new light and have to be rethought and resaid in a new way that's appropriate and that deals with the situation we're in. So there is like a newness to the theology of the body in that it's a new language, a new, like you said, a new set of tools. Like I think it's really good to think of it as a like he's forming words that didn't exist before,
Yes.
or concepts that didn't exist before, in order to have the tools necessary to investigate the truth that was always there.
Yes.
Right? You know,
Yes.
so that's bleeds into what it is. But because of that, what it isn't in the first instance, it's not just a sexual ethic. You know, when the Pharisees asked Jesus about divorce, he didn't go in to try to explain, like, it's not about what's right or wrong about divorce. It's like, well, it's about the beginning. It's about rediscovering something true about who you are. And once you rediscover that, then you'll understand what this divorce situation is about, right? And so it's going back to the beginning. So in the first place, it's not about stem cell research, and it's not about modesty, and it's not about, you know, who you can have sex with when and under what circumstances, and what's the line of too far, and how far can you go, and how short your skirt can be, and, you know, like all of those like things that, you know, when we're in high school, maybe you've heard about the theology of the body, and a lot of times like those are the rules of engagement are what you're trying to teach high school students. And you say, hey, look, here's the dynamic that's happening, and this is why you probably shouldn't dress provocatively or something like that. But it's not a rule book. It's like, that's not what it is. It's not a text for children. You know, it's an adult book about adult things spoken about in an adult way. And so now the newness of the text and the richness of it and the capacities that open up really have captured the imagination of a lot of people within the life of the church. And so you end up with this sort of explosion of, let's say, popularizers, you know, like Christopher West and many, many others. He's probably the most well-known, who like, look, everyone needs to know about this. And thanks be to God, right? Because the implications of these things have been they're so helpful. But what sometimes that effort to popularize and, you know, spread the biggest possible net to the most number of people in a way that the most people can understand, you lose things in translation, and you end up with sort of a veneer, you know, of the reality. A good example, and I think this flows out, a good analogy of this that I think that flows out of the theology of the body is like getting to know a person, you know, and you can take pictures of a person, and those pictures can kind of give you a sense of their personality and, you know, what they like and what they don't like. And, you know, you can look at a slideshow of a person, and the slideshow gives you certain insight, but like, do you know a person? Is there any person that you know all the way down to the bottom? Like, you marry somebody and you've been married for 25 years and you're still like, okay, I know my wife knows me better than anyone else in the world. And she's like, what the heck is going on with you? I don't understand. Like, because there's no end, there's no bottom to what can be understood or what can be learned. And the task of continuing to re-engage the person never ends. You never have it. And so that's what the theology of the body is. And so I think sometimes we get this like slideshow version of the theology of the body, and then we think, oh, we know what that is. It's sexual ethics. It's, you know, when is it okay? When is it not okay? Where the lines are. And it's a profound misunderstanding to stop at that surface, right? It's not just the surface. It's not just the implications. It's the what, as you said, Trey. It's the why behind those things. That's actually adequate for the situation we're in right now, like where we are in history and what's going on in the church right now.
Mm-hmm. As you were saying that, I was just reminded of a homily I heard just a couple of weeks ago. But I've, this isn't, again, it's not new, but the way he said it struck my heart in a deeper way that, right, the joy of the resurrection is not a thing, it's a person. That our faith, like we are, the point is to love, know, and serve the Lord. Like, and so when we approach any teaching as a thing, like a set of rules, a list of things that we need to know and like structure our lives and have a checklist, it will never like fit into the human heart, because we're doing it out of love, not out of this sort of the duty or the desire, the responsibility to do it comes after love and responsibility after, right? That you love someone and you get to know what is due in that relationship. And so I love everything that you said.
That's right. I mean, like, this is my current soapbox, and Trey and I we talk more about this, but we've, in the culture of the Catholic Church in America for the last, let's say 100 years or maybe longer than that, we've sort of put all of our eggs in the teaching of children basket. Like, oh, if we can just teach children, then they'll be Catholic forever. And then, but what are the things that you can teach children? Like, what are the rules? What's okay? What's not okay? What's a grave sin? All these things. Because that's what children need. The children need to know what the rules are. But as you grow into an adult and you kind of take the reins of your own life, your mom isn't in the kitchen saying, don't touch the stove. Like, that's your stove and you have to operate that stove and you are cooking with it. And there's nobody standing over your shoulder saying, do this, don't do that. Like, it's your thing to do and you have to take it up. And so the rules get you by. The things you remember are your parents, but as an adult, life becomes more and more a creative endeavor. It's more and more you having to do your thing in the way that you do it. And the rules, not that, it's never a good, like, okay, if you're arguing with your spouse, killing them is not an option, right? That's okay, there's a moral rule, don't kill anybody, right? But that doesn't help you figure out how to live. It doesn't figure out how to be married or how to continue to deal with this person that's driving you crazy. And like, oh, well, you haven't killed anybody. Well, then you're good. It's like, no, I'm not good. Like, life is more complicated. So the rules are like a baseline, but understanding my marriage, understanding my wife, understanding the importance of it, the implications of it, why my marriage is important for my children, why marriage is important for my society. All of those things, if I understand those things, then I can learn why and how to be patient with my wife, or why and how to deal with when's it time to have an argument, when's it time to not. And that's like a much more adult way to do that. And you can't teach the faith those things to children because they're just not at that place in life. But we have a problem, I think, in our culture, in our American Catholic culture, to think that once I have all the rules, I went to Catholic school for 12 years, so I got it because I know what all the rules are. It's like, no, there's like way more than that, like way more than that. And I think the Theology of the Body tries to explore that. And because that's difficult for us, we tend to downshift into, well, what are the moral rules? Like, what's the bottom line? Is what's okay, what's not okay? And it's not that. It's richer than that. Yeah.
Yeah. So good. So true. Listeners, I think we've laid a really great foundation here. I think that we have talked about the history. Yeah. What is the theology of the body? What isn't it? Trey, you said the lens. What's the perspective to view the rest of the conversations we're going to have? So I really encourage you listeners to stay tuned for episode 2. And we're going to talk about not like chapter by chapter, sort of, section by section, what did JP2 say? But like, what is the theology of the body? What do those words even mean? And how does that help us understand our own bodies and what they are communicating to the world? So that's what we're going to talk about next. And so we'll see you on the next series of Theology of the Body. Thank you so much for joining us for this Springs in the Desert podcast episode. We would be so grateful if you took a minute to rate, review, subscribe, and give today so that we can reach more listeners on the path of infertility. Don't forget to check out our social media pages on Facebook and Instagram, and go to our website, springsinthedesert.org, where you can subscribe to our newsletter and community prayer list, read our blog, and register for virtual and in-person events. And most importantly, remember that God loves you so much, and so do we.